Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome newcomers, members, and friends to our worship service at Central Unitarian Church. My name is Susan Gempler, and it's my pleasure to be assisting Reverend Maul in today's service. My husband and I also had the pleasure of attending an iftar dinner this past week at Peace Island's headquarters in Hackensack. We were so warmly welcomed. Individually, it was amazing. And they educated us, and they fed us a fantastic dinner. It was just a wonderful program and an honor to be able to participate in the breaking of the fast dinner. I was really impressed by the calm and willing discipline practiced by these people during Ramadan. It was quite an education, and I just gained a lot of respect for them. I can really smell these roses up here. It smells fabulous. CUC is an inclusive community of all ages. We embrace diversity in identity, expression, and spiritual belief. Our goal is that we as a group will leave the service today inspired, thoughtful, renewed, and possibly provoked into action. If you are visiting us in person, please be sure to say hello to one of our welcome hosts. I believe it's just Jim Carabin today. And if you're visiting online, we invite you to... Oh, Denise is here too. I'm sorry. And Denise. So raise your hands. Okay. If you're visiting online, we invite you to sign our guest book, and the link for the guest book should be provided in the chat at the bottom of your screen. We are immensely grateful for all those helping to make the service happen, including Matt Anderson, our music director and leading our music today, Phil Sosinsky and John Freund, who oversee the sound and the live transmission of our service, our coffee hosts, Linda Fritsch and Elizabeth Stewart, and last but definitely not least, the Reverend Andrée Cornelia Maul. We invite you to stay after service for coffee, conversation, and connection. And in preparation for our service this morning, we ask those of you who are here in this room to please silence your electronic devices. And we encourage our online congregants to light their personal chalices when we light our chalice here at CUC. Now, I've got a couple announcements here. Number one, our annual Easter egg hunt is happening today after service down the street at 105 Fairview Avenue. If you have young ones who would like to participate, please be sure to have them stay there after faith formation classes this morning, or head over there after the service to enjoy some Easter fun. There will also be crafts offered in addition to the egg hunt itself. Now, this is regarding Friday, this coming Friday, March 29th, which is, in this church, we don't really celebrate the Maundy Thursday and the Good Friday as much, but some of us do. The Westwood Clergy Council is hosting an annual Walk of Faith this Friday, which is Good Friday. The walk begins at noon, and it begins at Grace Episcopal Church, and each half hour will switch to other churches in Westwood, including, it's going to be a total of 5 churches. Each stop includes hymns, gospel readings, and a sermon by one of the local Christian ministers, all telling the story of the Passion of Christ. Between each stop, participants carry a wooden cross to the next location. This year's theme is the Women of the Passion. Reverend Andrée will be serving as the liturgist with Pastor Rodney Haveman, preaching at Parkside Community Church at 1:15 p.m. This is the third step in the walk. See Reverend Andrée if you have any questions about participating. Our annual CUC Passover Seder is scheduled for Saturday, April 20th at 6 p.m. here at the Westwood Women's Club. This annual ritual meal celebrating the Jewish holiday of Passover retells the story of the Israelites gaining their freedom from slavery in Egypt. We will include traditional readings, blessings, and songs for Passover. If you'd like to participate this year, please see Pam Zeldin after service to sign up. There's also, I believe, an electronic registration form will be included in the April bulletin. Now, I believe Janice has a report for us.
Good morning. Good morning. So, here's your stewardship pledge update. I'm happy to report that we have 47 pledges in realm at the moment. We're about $114,000, so we're over 80%. So for this time of the year, that's really very, very good. And we'll be actively following up with people in the next few weeks to try to get the rest of the pledges in. So if you want to see me after church or Jeff and let us know what your pledge is, we'll be happy to take care of that for you. Thank you.
And now let us formally begin our gathering. Please turn to someone near you and offer them a very warm welcome.
As suggested by our opening welcome and announcements, we find ourselves this Sunday in the midst of a number of holy days from a number of religious traditions around the world. We're in the middle of the month of Ramadan for Islam, which will continue until Tuesday, April 9th, which we honored last week in our service. And as Susan mentioned, a number of us attended an iftar dinner hosted by our siblings in faith at Peace Island Institute this past Tuesday. We find ourselves within the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is a festive holiday that commemorates the book of Esther and the salvation of the Jewish people from tyranny and annihilation of empire. And we have Passover coming up in just a few weeks, as you've heard, also a Jewish holiday. Tomorrow is Holi, which is the springtime Hindu festival of colors, which celebrates the eternal and divine love of the deities Radha and Krishna. And for Christians, today serves as the opening of the holiest week of the year. Today is Palm Sunday, marking Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, greeted by his followers waving palm leaves. This is a day of preparation for the difficult days ahead, but a path that eventually ends in hope, rebirth, and renewal on the other side on Easter Sunday. So our opening words this morning are for Palm Sunday, and they are by the Reverend Daniel Chesney Cantor. Today we begin the walk to Jerusalem, the Holy Week, the demand that we face the broken path, the abuse of power. Today, we walk toward the dayspring breaking through, the Easter day of joy. So let us prepare the way. Let us join together this morning in worship to see that holiness resides within and about us, to welcome in the day and to make a straight path for the work of God. Let us worship together. And I invite you to rise in body or spirit for opening hymn number 128, For All That Is Our Life.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dolores Connors, and I serve as a vice president on the Board of Trustees. I'm very happy to be here today and very happy to be participating in this service. So right now, I'm going to ask you to read with me or read aloud as I read aloud, you read our rites of chalice. So we light this chalice to remind us of our dreams, to nourish our heart, mind, and spirit, to work towards a better world for all, to embrace the whole of our human experience, to honor our past and our gifts of the present, to create a community where each of us may find healing, transformation, and hope. Thank you.
Our story today is a strange tale that comes from us across the centuries. It begins over 250 years ago in the 18th century and all the way across the sea in England. Legend has it that it was the year 1779, and a man named Ned Ludd, perhaps short for Edward Ludham, was a weaver in a town near Leicester. Ludd, in what was reported as a fit of passion, smashed 2 of his knitting frames. Some say he was an idle man and had been punished for being so idle, and this had led to the smashing. Others say he had been taunted by local youth, and he took out his anger on his knitting frames. Yet others claim the smashing was a protest against his exacting father, who was also a weaver and kept correcting Ned's work. No matter what led to Ned's destruction of his knitting frames, his actions became folklore in the region, and whenever frames were found broken, which I guess in those days was a common thing, people would joke that it must have been Ned Ludd. Now, over 30 years later, in 1812, there were English textile workers who, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, began to protest the use of automated machinery, which claimed to save companies money, but which they saw as a threat to their craft and their livelihood. The workers organized, calling themselves Luddites, naming themselves after Ned Ludd, raiding mills and destroying the new machines. They wrote threatening letters to mill owners and government officials and signed them from General Ludd or King Ned Ludd. And Phil, do we have a picture of Ned Ludd we can throw up here on the screen? Here we go. So this is a picture of General Ludd, the mythic figure leading the Luddites. Unfortunately, their revolution was squashed by legal actions and military force, with some of the Luddites facing penal transportation to distant colonies or even execution for their actions. And so the Industrial Revolution, too great for their effort to cause any lasting impact, continued. And to many of us in the Western culture, the Luddite story is all but forgotten, and their legacy has been construed to represent anyone who dares oppose the secular gods of progress. But not all has been lost to time. The spirit of the Luddites has lived on, especially in the hearts of working-class people who immortalize these revolutionaries in songs and in poems. The Luddites are invoked more and more with the growing digital revolution and with the rapid growth and proliferation of artificial intelligence. Some say AI offers us unlimited possibilities, and others say it opens a gateway to an apocalyptic future where machines fully take over our lives. The rising number of opponents to such technology proudly wear the badge Luddite. Some even organize around the name, such as a high school group in Brooklyn, which has given up their smartphones for old-fashioned flip phones and disconnected from social media or the internet overall, replacing their previous digital activities with reading printed books, engaging in phone-free phone time or social time, and undertaking new hobbies such as sewing, writing, or painting. The ending of the story remains as uncertain as the origins of the original 18th century leader. Yet the story still calls to many of us, whispering secret desires of a world where we once again turn from our machines back to each other. And so, the spirit of Ned Ludd carries on.
We are able to fulfill our mission here at Central Unitarian Church through your very generous contributions of our members and friends. Your financial gifts help us to maintain our operating budget, which includes paying for our staff and all the programming. If you are capable of making a financial contribution today, your gift will help ensure that CUC continues to be a vital part of our lives and our community. Our offering will now be gratefully received. Thank you, Matt. That was beautiful. Can you all say together the dedication words? We dedicate these gifts in service of our mission to welcome all into a home of spiritual diversity that challenges us to become our best selves, to minister to one another in love, and to serve the greater community.
Now we enter into a time of meditation, taking time to share together the joys and sorrows of this community, something we do each week as a way of caring for each other. I have a number of joys and sorrows which were shared ahead of time that I'll read out loud. I'll also take a moment to read any joys or sorrows which are now typed into the chat. And then I will invite each of you to share out loud the name of anybody else you're holding in your heart today. From there, we'll enter into a moment of silence, followed by a moment of prayer. So let us take a breath together, preparing for this time, taking a breath in of peace, breathing out a breath of love, as we enter into a space of holy listening, as we share today the joys and sorrows of this community for Sunday, March 24th, 2024. For all these joys and all these sorrows, both spoken and unspoken, let us now hold them together in love as we enter into this time of silence. Dear God, one of many names and no names, Spirit that connects us and binds us together in love, we move through our lives, lifting up celebrations, milestones, accomplishments, and we navigate together the challenges and sorrows of our lives, of sickness, of loss, of struggle. And we witness collectively the hurt of this world and what feels to so many of us as a rapidly changing world, sometimes changing in ways that scare us, in ways that we didn't think would happen. We witness so much loss and death and destruction and suffering, and we sometimes feel powerless to do anything about it. But may we pray, may we find actions we can take, words we can speak. May the things we do influence those in power to move away from such destructive ways and turn once again to each other. For that is the way that we know we can create a kingdom of heaven here on earth, a world where we celebrate and love each other in all our beautiful diversity. So may it be. Blessed be, and amen. I invite you to remain seated for our next hymn. I know this rose will open. Let's sing it through twice.
Today's reading is called The Low Road by Marge Piercy. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up. They can bust you. They can break your fingers. They can burn your brain with electricity. Blur you with drugs till you can't walk and can't remember. They can take your child, wall up your lover. They can do anything, and you can't stop them. You can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone? You can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house and eat pie for dinner with no seconds and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration, 100 fill a hall, 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter, 10,000 power in your own paper, 100,000 your own media, 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say, we, and know who you mean. And each day you mean one more.
So I turned 49 a few weeks ago, and as my wife, Max, proclaimed, I'm in my 50th year. I still won't let her forget that. But yes, I'm in my 50th year. I am part of Generation X, the smallest generation by population. We're sometimes referred to as the forgotten generation. We grew up at the height of the Cold War. During our formative years as teens and young adults, we experienced the peak of the AIDS crisis. The impending sense of helplessness and doom about the future surrounded us. Yet, we also saw much of that hopelessness reverse. We also experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR, the invention of the antiretrovirals to combat HIV. We also experienced, again in our formative years, the beginning of the digital revolution, the rapid expansion of the use of home computers, the internet, and cell phones. We are an in-between generation, a sandwich generation where many of us are raising our kids and caring for our aging parents at the same time. And we also straddle aspects of the generations before and after us. In general, we're less trustworthy of institutions and less religious than our parents, but not as anti-institutional and anti-religious as our kids. For an example, when I began engaging in congregational life in my 20s, I was often the youngest person in the room, and still, as minister in my 50th year, I am quite often still in a congregation the youngest person in the room. Now, many of us in my generation, we've openly embraced technologies that have grown around us, but we're not the digital natives that our children are. And I'm finding as I get older, I get nostalgic for silly things that my kids don't quite understand that I try to explain to them. Like cooking before we ever had microwave ovens. Figuring out what television programs to watch before we had on-demand television. Trying to reach people before we had cell phones. And a world where we didn't have cameras that fit in your pocket and gave you pictures instantly. Do you remember waiting a few days to a week to get your photos back from your vacation? And you were never quite sure if they were come out okay? And those tragic moments where something happened to your film and everything just came out either white or totally dark, right? How do I explain this to my kids? They don't understand. Do you remember phone books? As a California kid where phone books were a good 3 inches or more, my first encounter with phone books was actually sitting on them because my grandparents used them as a booster seat so I could actually see over at the table and eat my meal. Little did I know I had all that knowledge right underneath my butt when I was having dinner as a kid. How about paper maps? Anybody miss paper maps sometimes? I kind of do miss paper maps. They're around and people use them, exactly. How about slowing down, rolling down your window for the toll booth at the Garden State Parkway, throwing your change and then rolling the window back up and you never quite stopped, right? You just kind of kept coasting, all in one motion. Again, can't explain the thrill of that to my children. They just don't understand what I'm talking about. Did you ever learn how to fold the New York Times so that you could read it on the bus or the subway or do the crossword without disturbing anybody else around you? I never learned how to do that, but I always admired people who could. Do you remember leaving work at work, especially on weekends? So the older I get, the more I see everyone around me disappearing into their phones at the expense of human interaction, the more this type of nostalgia starts to turn to something a little bit more, right? I've witnessed, and I'm sure many of you have seen, walking by a family in a restaurant, and maybe 4 of them are there at the table, and they're sharing a meal, but each one of them is on their own device, and they're not actually talking to one another. Or maybe they are, maybe they're texting each other and I just don't understand. But when I see things like that, I kind of long for at least the 1990s. My wife, Max, and I have a little game that we like to play once in a while that taps into that longing. When we have a question or a problem to solve, sometimes we like to ask each other, how would I answer this question or solve this problem in the 90s? I pull out a phone book or a dictionary, like a printed phone book or dictionary. Maybe I'd go to the library to look it up. Maybe I'd call a friend to ask them if they remembered. And if I was feeling lonely, instead of going online, I'd head down to some community reading place, like the local pub or the coffee shop, to see if any of my friends happened to be hanging around there. Some might say, as I say these things, that I am becoming a Luddite. But what kind of Luddite? In the sense of our dominant Western culture as someone who's just rejecting technology? Or in the sense of the original Luddites, rebelling against technology that denied their humanity as skilled workers? So technology in and of itself isn't good or bad. Technology, of course, has provided so many things to us. Major advances in healthcare, our ability to collaborate and share around the world to solve big problems. Scientists and humanitarian organizations can find and share information with anybody across the globe. We can connect with others who may share interests or identity or similar life challenges who might not be in our geographical area. Technology has enabled me to work in a global job before I became a minister for almost 20 years with minimal travel, but I still could have a global job. Technology enabled me to work full-time while attending seminary and not uprooting my family to move to another city. Technology allowed me to discover my identity and to come out in ways that were not possible in the 90s when there was no openly trans Unitarian Universalist ministers. Technology helped keep us connected during the pandemic. Yet, with all of these advances, those same technologies are also proving to lead to more shallow relationships and ruptures in human connection, with more and more people citing loneliness and lack of true friendship. And I like to remind myself that smartphones only came out in June of 2007, 6 months before my daughter Chloe was born. So that makes a smartphone the equivalent of a high school sophomore, right? And we wouldn't necessarily let high school sophomore run our entire lives, yet we've so easily allowed these smartphones to be integrated into our lives, and we're now starting to see the detrimental effect they can have on our relationships and our mental health. Many of us, although not all, have done what humans do so well. We've adapted ourselves to certain situations in the digital world for which we should have remained maladjusted. And with the growing power of artificial intelligence, concerns over the effect of digital technologies in our life continues to rise. Now, during the story I shared earlier, I alluded to a group of high schoolers in Brooklyn calling themselves Luddites. This club, the Luddite Club, was highlighted in an article in the New York Times in 2022. The founder of the group burned out from social media during the pandemic and decided to do something radical. She put her phone in a box. And for the first time, she said in the article, or the article said about her, she experienced life in the city as a teenager without an iPhone. She borrowed novels from the library and started admiring graffiti when she rode the subway, then fell in with some teens who taught her how to spray paint in a freight yard in Queens. And she began waking up without an alarm clock at 7 a.m., no longer falling asleep to the glow of her phone at midnight. Once she wrote in a text titled The Luddite Manifesto, she fantasized about throwing her iPhone in the Gowanus Canal. She, like so many of her other club members, now carry what I referred to earlier as old-fashioned flip phones instead of smartphones. And I actually know there's some folks here at CUC who still have smartphones, so yes, holding out. When I got my flip phone, the founder shared, things instantly changed. I started using my brain. It made me observe myself as a person. And I've been trying to write a book, too. It's easy to get caught up in the flow of the world around you. And these teens are of a generation where smartphones are not only generally not questions, they're prized, much to the frustration of the adults, many of the adults in their lives, because they become a central component of teenage life. Yet these teens refuse to get caught up in that flow because they realize it involves a sacrifice they are no longer willing to make. We've got this theory, one of the club members said, that we're not just meant to be confined to a building and work. Social media and phones are not real life. These are Luddites in the true legacy of the name, like the striking mill workers before them, smashing the automated machinery, taking away their livelihood. These teens are symbolically smashing their smartphones in protest by locking them in a door or fantasizing about throwing them in the Gowanus Canal. They're not just rejecting technology for technology's sake or for being different, or they don't necessarily hate technology. They're seeing the way that technology is disconnecting them from themselves, from others, and from the life that they want, and they're doing something about it. Now, as I was considering other Luddites throughout history, one that comes immediately to mind during this Holy Week is Jesus of Nazareth. While Jesus wasn't organizing for workers' rights, he was not above smashing things in order to draw attention to his calls for reform. One of the first things he did when he arrived in Jerusalem was go to the temple. And when he arrived at the temple, he found that it was being used as a place for business transaction instead of religious activities. It was a temple marketplace. Disgusted by this, he came in and he turned over all the tables in the marketplace and declared that it should be a place of religion, and spent many days there teaching and healing in his last week here on earth. This radical teacher and leader was not trying to found a new religion. He was fighting against the flow of what Judaism had become under the control and power of an empire in his own particular place and time. He was trying to return his followers to a path of reconnection with their God, with their tradition, and with each other. And this can be seen as the true spirit of a Luddite, resisting change that robs us of vital connections we need to ourselves, to each other, to the earth, and to the sacred. Such a resistance can start with one person daring to be different, refusing to just go with the flow and the changes around them. And it can grow to a few who might then form a club, and it can grow into a movement. Marge Piercy's poem speaks exactly of this type of resistance, one for the sake of reconnection, and then one that grows from a single person daring to fight against systems and powers which are much, much greater than an individual. Resistance against forces that can threaten to crush you. She writes, "It goes one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they say no. It starts when you say we and know who we mean. And each day you mean one more." For Jesus, the resistance against the establishment was against the establishment and the empire. And he knew entering Jerusalem that the great powers he was resisting would likely try to end him. Yet he continued. And for the Luddite Club in Brooklyn, they are resisting against the growing tide of digitalization taking over their lives. They were rejected and criticized by their peers. Some of their parents weren't entirely supportive of their unplugged life because it shifted the dynamic of modern parents where you can track and contact your kids at any time, right? Yet, they continue. And that is how we make change in the face of change. That is how the newer generations hold a deeper sense and awareness of racism, misogyny, transphobia, and homophobia than many of the generations before them. This is how people are mobilizing in all different ways, whether they're workers mobilizing for their rights, individuals or mobilizing for their human rights. This is how people are mobilizing around the genocide happening in Gaza. Yet when many of these movements get big enough, we have to continue to ask ourselves how they're pulling us together instead of pushing us apart. There's always a way of getting into the flow that leaves us caught in systems we don't intend to create. We've seen a massive shift in people's reactions to the war in Gaza since October 7th. The plea of the Palestinian people, which some have been fighting to support for decades, now screams out to us through the horrors of so many civilians, especially women and children who are dead and injured. The calls for immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages and prisoners, and the delivery of much-needed humanitarian aid are very necessary, coupled with declarations about the future of Palestine and Israel. This is again exposing deep generational differences, especially for liberal Jewish people, bringing into question the whole project of Zionism. And in these movements, in these tensions, in these words that are being used, there are very concerning anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, discrimination, and violence that is arising. And I'm not speaking about disagreements in ideology, which some refer to as anti-Semitism and which I have spoken about in previous services. I'm speaking about situations where people speaking in favor of free Palestine commit acts of anti-Semitism, or people speaking in favor of the state of Israel commit anti-Muslim acts. I signed a letter this weekend by the Upper Pascack Valley Clergy Council, a group that includes rabbis, imams, and ministers, concerned about the anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, discrimination, and violence we're all seeing in our local community. The letter calls on our local communities, especially as we enter the holy days for three of the major faith traditions in our world, Ramadan, Easter, and Passover, to work through our differences without turning on each other. This is one of the ways we need to be cautious as we build new movements. There was a New York Times article this week by Peter Beinart, who's an editor-at-large for the magazine Jewish Currents. And he wrote a guest essay that was focusing on the rupture, especially among generational lines within American Jewish life since the October 7th attacks. A rupture that he points out has been in the making for a long time. And one of the many topics in his essay focuses on the rise of hate towards specific groups within the US. He writes, "From the hostility toward German Americans during World War I to the violence against American Muslims after September 11th and assault on Asian Americans during the COVID pandemic, there is a long and ugly tradition of Americans expressing their hostility toward foreign governments or movements by targeting Americans who share a religion, ethnicity, or nationality with those overseas adversaries. Today, tragically, some Americans who loathe Israel are taking it out on American Jews. Palestinian Americans who have endured multiple hate crimes since October 7th are experiencing their own version of this phenomenon. And the spike in anti-Semitism since October 7th follows a pattern. 5 years ago, a study by political scientist Eyal Feinberg, using data from 2001 and 2014, found that reported anti-Semitic incidents in the United States spike when the Israeli ministry conducts a substantial military operation. Once we start turning on each other, especially if we're working towards the same ends. We've lost the spirit of what set us on our path to begin with. Some of this that I'm seeing is happening within movements of people who are all fighting for a free Palestine. Jews, Muslims, Palestinians, Christians, all secular folks all coming together and fighting for the same thing, but that harm is happening within these movements. We must not create more disconnection for those fighting for the same cause. When we start off with smashing an entrenched idea, institution, or movement, we can too easily turn to smashing each other. And in movements which often grow these days through online communications where swipes, likes, and comments can easily build us up or tear us apart, this seems vitally important. The war and our role in it as Americans will play a pivotal part in the upcoming election, with people already taking sides and analysts already trying to determine how it will affect who enters the Oval Office in January. And our technology, how we interact with each other, what information we share, we consume, we receive, we take action on, all of this will also gravely affect our election. Our actions as a result of the war may also play a pivotal part in building or tearing apart the fabrics of our very communities in the coming months. The stakes could not be higher. So many, like the Luddites, like the examples that Jesus offered through his life, we need to ask what is pushing us apart and killing us, and what is pulling us together and supporting life. Even when we're within groups of people, especially when we're within groups of people working towards the same goal. These questions are both easy and difficult to answer, especially with regards to the war in Gaza. But it is work that we have to do together. So in my 50th year, I need to stop saying that. No, I've passed 49. It's in my 50th year. That's how birthdays work. Yeah. Yeah, I know, right? This is why I'm joking about it. But somewhere between my 49th birthday and my 50th birthday, I live in this generation that straddles those that came before us and those that came after us. And as we consider this Holy Week and all the days celebrated at this time around the world, and as we consider the legacy of the Luddites who chose to rise up against change for the sake of humanity, this is my plea. That we remain attuned to the changes of this world that surround us and affect us. That we don't resist them just for the sake of resistance. But also that we don't simply go with the flow. That we pay attention. And we continue to work to bring us back into connection with each other. That may involve us smashing our phones, literally or figuratively. It certainly involves continuing to find new ways that our technologies that have taken over our life can support building each other up instead of tearing each other apart. And so, with this plea, my hope is that the story of Ned Ludd, begun so long ago, can continue to live through us. As we find these new way forwards, I invite you to rise, embody your spirit for our closing hymn, which is in the Teal hymnal, 1017, Building a New Way. If Matt, you can give us a little intro for that, I think that would be helpful.
Let us say together the chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this chalice flame, but not our promise to each other, to act with grace, to hold each other in love, to serve this community and our world. This promise of the heart serves as a reminder of how we live together. May it bring joy to our collective lives.
In this universe that will change, and that will change us, may we remain attuned to what remains alive in us, the vital thread of love and compassion for ourselves, for each other, and for our world, which we must never let go. That is what will guide us, to help us go with the flow or to resist for the sake of all of our lives. Blessed be, and amen. Thank you, Matt, for the lovely music this morning. Thank you, Susan, for being our worship associate. Thank you to John and Phil for our tech. Thanks to you for being here and participating in our worship service. As a reminder, a few things happening if you want to participate in the Easter egg hunt and crafts. That's down at 105 Fairview. I also know some of you are participating in a Committee on Shared Ministry conversation that is down that way as well, and I believe Susan Springstead, if she is still here, can show you how to get there if you don't know. And then those of you that are participating in the UUA Common Read on Repentance and Repair conversations with me, we're holding our last session here at noon. So enjoy.